should actually look at the intent of the framers and say, well, what did they mean when they wrote this? And then apply the law as it was intended, that somehow this is some kind of foreign concept, that the idea is we should not even care what the founders meant, that we should read the Constitution based on whatever we want it to be. So if there's a provision, that says the government can't do this, well, then we should just interpret it to mean, well, they can do that. It doesn't matter what they meant, which is crazy. I mean, how could you say? I mean, what if traffic laws were like that, where it says, well, the law says that I got to stop at a red light. Well, what if someone says, well, but my interpretation of that law is you got to slow down a little bit. You don't have to come to a complete stop, or hey, maybe you just go on a red light. No, I mean, obviously, what you have to look at the intent of the law, because that is the law. You have to enforce what the people who wrote the law meant. You can't just kind of concoct some other idea and just enforce that, because there's an old expression about being a nation of laws and not a nation of men. Well, the idea that the Constitution is up to interpretation would mean that we're not a nation of laws, because the law doesn't matter. We're a nation of men who make up the laws as they go along. That's apparently what Chris Matthews wants us to be. But listen to how he tries to discredit the idea of original intent by talking about slavery. A lot of people that want to discredit the Founding Fathers want to point out that the Founding Fathers had slaves, or slavery was in the Constitution, which of course it was, although a lot of the Founding Fathers were opposed to slavery, yet they needed to allow for it anyway in order to get the southern states to ratify the document. But they always want to hide behind slavery as if because there was slavery, everything else that our founding fathers believed in must have been wrong, and we should reject the Constitution just the way we rejected slavery. But anyway, here is this cut from Chris Matthews. It's cut number 4.
Let me proffer a tougher judgment. Would this court, voting as it does today, have upheld the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, the statute which declared it illegal to refuse access to someone because of race to a restaurant, hotel, or a gas station restroom? Would Scalia, Thomas, Alito, and Kennedy have approved such a decision, or would they have joined in the dissent? Well, maybe Kennedy would have. The fact is we have the most conservative court since the early 1930s, and maybe more conservative than that. These justices, led by Scalia, believe in original intent. They want to judge cases the way the Founding Fathers would. Well, the Founding Fathers, need I remind us all, wrote slavery into the Constitution. It took a civil war and the 13th Amendment to get it out.
Okay, so first of all, there's so much stuff wrong there, but let me start with the slavery issue and original intent. The original intent of the framers was that the Constitution could be amended. Right? They wrote the amendment process into the Constitution. So, given that we have the 13th Amendment, and it wasn't the Civil War that really ended slavery, it was the 13th Amendment that ended it, but given the fact that we have a 13th Amendment, that is consistent with a original intent view of the Constitution, because the original intent of the framers was to allow for amendments. The 13th Amendment is an amendment consistent with that original intent. So an original intent view of the Constitution would be that slavery is illegal. Yet he is trying to imply that that's not the case, that we have to go back and believe in slavery because slavery was there. Well, the 13th Amendment is now there. And it wasn't there in 1789, but it's there now. And so it is part of the Constitution. So the whole thing, again, is a straw man that he is raising to try to equate conservative justice with somebody who would believe in slavery, who would say, well, we had slavery under the original Constitution, therefore we need to go back to slavery today. In fact, I'm sure that many of the founding fathers, such as Jefferson and Adams, would have loved to have had the 13th Amendment part of the original Bill of Rights. They would have loved to included that amendment, but they couldn't have done it if they wanted to get the Southern support to form the United States. So I'm sure that Thomas Jefferson would be very happy with the 13th Amendment. I mean, there are a lot of other amendments he would not like the 16th Amendment, for example, but I'm sure that there would have been a lot of support for the 13th Amendment among the founding fathers, but that does not negate the idea of original intent.